Hello and welcome back to PA Chuck Up. I'm your host Manny, and today we have Aaron. Hi Aaron, how are we doing?
Hi, doing pretty well. How you doing, Manny?
I'm good. So we've just been kind of speaking offline, just catching up and sort of going through some of the topics that we want to. Some of them are very, we'll say, touchy, and we're kind of in agreement on them.
hmm
Um, but if you just give us a little rundown on who you are and what you do and how you got to where you are.
Absolutely. So my name is Aaron Spira. I'm mainly an online health and fitness coach. I specialize in two areas that seem pretty different, but when you get down into the nitty gritty of it, actually end up being very similar. I help people with injury recovery, either post injury or post surgery, getting back to their former level of function, getting back to their fitness or physique goals. And then I help people with competitive bodybuilding. And I got into all of this because I have a number of genetic health conditions. I have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, also known as EDS. This is a connective tissue disorder that makes all of the connective tissue in my body both very weak and very stretchy. This has resulted in me having quite literally hundreds to maybe thousands of dislocations throughout my life. And then I have another disorder called postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. This is a central nervous system disorder that makes it so my nervous system does not know how to properly regulate blood flow upon postural changes, which results in some other nervous system dysregulation around adrenergic stuff. And then I have fibromyalgia, which is chronic diffuse muscle pain. And yeah, so as a result of having these all really become prevalent in my adolescent years, and really becoming so prevalent that I had to stop doing all the things I loved in life. I was determined to figure out how I could help my body out and get back to the level of function that I wanted to be at. All of the health professionals, all of the doctors and physical therapists I was going to were saying, stay away from anything high impact, don't lift anything heavy. And I tried doing that for a while, and I just watched my body fall apart more and more over time. And so at some point, I was like, okay, to hell with it all. I'm going to do what I think I should do. I got into powerlifting, which looking back on it, probably wasn't the worst decision in the world, but how I went about it, because I had no idea what I was doing, ended up giving me some really gnarly back problems. Ended up herniating my L4, L5 disc because I was maxing out on deadlifts 5 days a week. And then after many years of repeated injuries, just trying to get into the gym and then injuring myself and having to stop doing everything again, I eventually committed myself to learning as much as I could around injury recovery, building muscle, how really advanced bodybuilders who have muscular strength that far exceeds that of their connective tissue strength, how all these modes of training work. And I combined this with my almost a decade of being in physical therapy myself, all of the lessons and tools I learned there to eventually synthesize a method of training that allowed me to actually get stronger over time, despite all of my health challenges, and really start allowing me to get back into all the sports and activities that I really loved. And as we'll talk about pretty soon, part of my journey involves hormones and recovery enhancing drugs. And so my my approach to using these is probably quite different from much of what you might have heard or what many other coaches in the world of bodybuilding or otherwise might suggest. So we'll get into all of
I
it.
think there's a lot to unpack there already. To start off with, how was the journey between obviously being injured all the time, not knowing why all these injuries are happening, being in physiotherapy? What was that learning process, and what sort of avenues did you go to learn these processes and how to better manage your conditions?
Yeah. So at first, we didn't even know that I had a connective tissue disorder, right? At the time, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome was such a rare condition that barely any doctor had ever even heard the name before. It wasn't until I went in to get a sleep study done that the sleep specialist doctor there at the time had noticed that I was very hypermobile just in like the way I was sitting and fidgeting with my limbs. She said, "Hey, do you by chance have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome?" And we asked her some questions because we had no idea what it was. It turns out her husband had the condition. And so we looked into it. I went to a rheumatologist and got that diagnosis. And that explained why all of my joints were dislocating on a daily basis, you know? And when I was a kid, things would pop out. I'd just pop them back in. No issue. There was no pain associated with it. But as I started, really like once I reached puberty, the dislocations started coming with more and more pain and
Mm.
debilitation afterwards. And since they were happening with most of my major joints multiple times a day, it got to the point where I just couldn't engage in physical activity, and nearly to the point where I could barely get around in daily life. Many times I was just bedridden because my body was in such a poor state. And initially, the when you get diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, they don't tell you what to do about it, because there isn't technically a treatment. They just say what not to do, which for me ended up being very bad advice. But they did prescribe physical therapy. Most physical therapists are very skilled at taking people from post surgery or post injury to getting them back to like normal, healthy levels of function in everyday life. They are generally not so good, just general physical therapists, at taking people who have significantly weaker connective tissue than the general population. And so my experiences for the first few years of physical therapy were that after each session, I would actually be in significantly more pain and be significantly less functional for days after each session. This actually got to the point where I had to just stop doing physical therapy altogether because I would be like debilitated from one physical therapy session to the next physical therapy session.
Why
Um,
do you think that was?
they were having me do exercises without taking into consideration the fact that my range of motion significantly exceeded a healthy normal range of motion. And so, similarly, just because I
And
could
so you can do it, so keep pushing.
exactly, they're used to people who have limited ranges of motion
Yeah.
and working to expand that. I have the opposite. I can just keep going. And so for me, it was a very important journey to learn when to stop. And similarly, there, just because I can muscularly accomplish some given task doesn't mean my connective tissue can adequately recover from it. That is something that has taken me a significantly longer amount of time to realize, and well, not just realize, but actually learn to work with. And so for quite some time, I was in physical therapy for years. It made everything kind of significantly worse. I took a step back from it and tried doing some stuff myself. I would get a significant injury, go into physical therapy, and yeah, after a few years, I started learning like, hey, they're telling me what they think I should do. I need to put that through a filter of myself and determine what are the constraints around the exercises they're wanting me to do, and how hard I really can push while still recovering from things. After a while, I realized that yeah, even when I do that, physical therapists again are great at getting me from post injury to being able to get around in daily life, like being able to drive my car, do dishes, stuff like that. But not necessarily the best. And there are physical therapists out there who are great for athletes. I just haven't been to them. But general physical therapists aren't generally great at getting people from functional in daily life to highly athletic. And that was where I was trying to go. And so after, trying to find what sports, what activities I could get into and have my body actually keep up with it, I had a number of serious shoulder dislocations on my left shoulder, one moderate one on my right. That led to a complete, there's no more attachment of my labrum in my left shoulder, and there's partial tear in the right one. Uh, yeah, not fun. And at the time, I'm actually very grateful to this surgeon. He was I don't actually remember the type of surgeon he was, but he specialized in athletes. I showed him that he took the X-rays. I showed him kind of what I was capable of, because at the time I got the X-rays about a year after the injuries happened, and I was able to now get my arm up to like parallel level. parallel with the floor. And he was like, given your range of motion, given your level of function, and given that you have a connective tissue disorder, I actually don't recommend that you get surgery on this because it probably won't improve your outcomes at all. So just keep strength training. And I am so grateful to him because that is really what kicked off my journey of just obsessively pouring through the research and pouring through how what is actually necessary to get muscle to grow, what
Mhm.
actually causes strength to develop, and what are the minimum amounts of these things that I can do. Because my recovery capacity was such a limiting factor at the time. Before I got on hormone replacement, and even once I figured out all the optimal ways of, or nearly optimal ways of going about these things, the minimum amount of work necessary to get my body to adapt was more than I was able to recover from. And so once I got on hormone replacement and going in to get my levels checked, I knew that I needed more than whatever I had. I didn't know if my levels were in a normal healthy range. I didn't know if I was hypogonadal. I didn't know anything. I just knew I needed something else in addition to what I already had. And so lo and behold, when I got my testosterone levels checked, I had the testosterone levels of like a 60-year-old man. And so it just happened to be like a medical need for me to replace my testosterone anyway. And at that point, all of the things that I'd learned for the past many years of just obsessively researching these things, I was actually able to apply very effectively, and I started making progress really quickly. Within a year, I had full range of motion back in the shoulder, and I was able to do like full range of motion pull ups unassisted. And now, what is this? I think this is 3 years later after that point that I last week I did full range of motion pull ups with 85 pounds strapped to me for 6 reps. So my shoulder still has no labrum attached, but I have full functionality back. And so once, sort of through that process, I realized that just because my connective tissue isn't necessarily as strong or doesn't necessarily provide as much support as normal healthy connective tissue might, that doesn't mean I need to limit myself in my goals or what I'm able to do. Because I can have my muscles sort of compensate for the lack of ability.
This brings on to like the obvious topic that we've been wanting to get into
Yeah,
and really get into the nitty gritties of things.
yeah,
Obviously, I've made my opinion very aware on anti-doping, and I'm very against athletes who dope. I'll say athletes who dope
mhm,
because, like we were discussing at the start, obviously an unfair advantage for whoever competes up against them. With our discussions and how we communicate with each other, we're both able to come to this conclusion that maybe it's not a bad thing for everyone.
mhm,
There is obviously like yourself who've got these conditions that are essentially designed to break down your body.
yeah,
So supplementing it with performance enhancing drugs is
yeah,
actually something that may be beneficial
mhm,
for those people and to just live a normal baseline life.
right.
And I kind of want to get your take on how it is that you've came up with these sort of solutions and what was that the research actually said that got you to think, look, this is actually the best thing for again what I do and how I can help people that come with me with similar degenerate sort of conditions that you have.
Mhm, yeah. So, and I should preface this by saying most of the clients that come to me, regardless of whether they have connective tissue disorders or just normal injuries or even just competitive bodybuilding, most of them are come to me natural, and most of them I have stay natural because in most cases they simply don't need the drugs to get to where they're trying to go. I'm a big proponent of getting all the basics fully dialed in first. And unless you have completely done everything you can in every other area, there's no justification for seeking out performance enhancing drugs or recovery enhancing drugs. Because there are things that you can still do that can still improve your outcomes without getting into those. But for myself and for a handful of clients that I have in like the injury recovery or chronic illness space, there are times at which you can get literally everything perfectly dialed in, or as perfect as one could possibly do, um, and still the minimum amount of volume necessary to create adaptations and to improve over time is still way more than their body's able to recover from. And I really came to this realization for myself, and then in clients that when I started coaching. Um, when I started going into the research on minimum effective volume and maximum recoverable volume. For normal healthy people, there's the spectrum. There's maintenance volume, which is just the smallest amount of volume necessary to just maintain your level of muscle or your level of strength, whatever specific outcome we're looking at here. Then there's minimum effective volume, which is the smallest amount of volume necessary to make improvements over time. Then there's maximum recoverable volume, which is the most amount of volume that you are able to recover from over a given period of time, uh, while still actually improving performance, right? Because if you go beyond that and you're not able to recover effectively between bouts of exercise, then your performance will start dropping over time. If you do it for too long, then you get into the territory of overreaching or overtraining, and that's where injuries can start occurring. And so for myself, I realized that even the smallest amount of volume measured as in effective working sets, the smallest amount of volume necessary for me to grow was more than I could recover from in even a whole week. If I only did one training session a week, I would still my performance and my ability to recover just wasn't sufficient. So my performance was just dropping week to week. I was essentially just falling apart and getting weaker over time. And so once I what that tells me is that my maximum recoverable volume was actually below my minimum effective volume. Um, and so there are things you can do to increase your maximum recoverable volume and to decrease your minimum effective volume, such as improving sleep, decreasing stress, improving your nutrition. Protein goes it goes a long way here. But also, are you in a caloric deficit or in a caloric surplus? If you're in a surplus, you're going to be able to recover from a hell of a lot more than if you're in maintenance. And similarly, if you're in deficit, your recovery is going to be way, way worse. And then, once all of that is dialed in, if you are still unable to get stronger over time with even a very small amount of volume, then for me, the answer was, okay, well, I've dialed in every other aspect of my life that I can feasibly manage. And so performance enhancing drugs, well, in this instance, I generally like to refer to them as recovery enhancing drugs, end up being the next place to go. And there are supplements that can have very small effects on these things, like creatine, for example. It will have an effect. If you're not able to get stronger over time on your own, creatine isn't going to wildly change that. Um,
One of my lecturers, he is very against creatine, but he had this saying where if it's not sufficient enough to change that much,
yeah,
it would probably be a banned substance.
yeah,
So creatine impacts a little bit, but it's not
right.
sufficient enough to be a banned substance. So it's not like it makes a big change.
Exactly. And I'm 100% on board with that, right? Like if it there's tons of people on social media claiming to be natural and just being on like, before creatine, after creatine, when they're really just like blasting loads of gear. And so I think people have a really big misconception around how powerful creatine is. But at the end of the day, it really all it does is it allows you to push just a fractional amount more in the gym. It just gives you a little bit more of a buffer cellularly. But regardless, so yeah, over the counter stuff, if it really had that big of an effect, exactly like you're saying, it would be on the banned substance list. And so for me, the thing to go to was what can increase my maximum recoverable volume and what can decrease my minimum effective volume, right? Because if maximum recoverable volume is below, we want both things to switch. And so things like exogenous androgens, like testosterone and other steroids, things like growth hormone, both of these things increase maximum recoverable volume. We can just call this MRV. and decrease minimum effective volume, we can call this MEV, such that you don't need to do as much to actually get stronger, and you can recover from significantly more volume and intensity in any given period of time. And so after going on testosterone replacement therapy, and I do mean like true replacement therapy at the time, it really transformed my ability to actually recover and get stronger over time. Where doing the exact same things I was doing before, because again, I had already tried optimizing every other aspect of my life. The exact same thing suddenly started having my ability to perform functionally and my physique just radically change in really, really short periods of time. I went from around 185 pounds at probably like 17 or 18% body fat to about 6 months later, I was 190 pounds at about 10% body fat. I had done no bulking and cutting cycles. I had just kept training and really almost entirely just done rehab type work, trying to get my knees and hips and shoulders and elbows and wrists to stop hurting all the time and just stay in their sockets.
Something that I was wanting to get a little bit more information on is how has your journey through sort of these recovery placement hormones impacted how you feel day to day, and how does that then impact you from, like, obviously when you go to sleep,
Mm-hmm.
pains and aches and everything just sort of gets higher. How has that helped you with your sleep and
Mm-hmm.
all the different aspects that go into EDS and POTS and all that stuff?
Yeah, so there were actually a number of effects that it had that I was not expecting. Um, and I'll just kind of talk about growth hormone and testosterone in the same vein here. I'll just say PEDs. Um, so when I began taking things, the first thing I noticed was a overwhelming decrease in day to day levels of anxiety. This came in a little bit less than 2 weeks after I started TRT. Um, and it wasn't just like magically my brain changed. It was that I had to think so much less about like consciously holding tension in my muscles to hold my
So that
joints
fear of
together.
dislocations, that fear of injuries
Yeah,
happening.
and so throughout my whole life, I just got used to just holding tension 100% of the time to stop my joints from just falling out of place. And as soon as I started TRT, the amount of intracellular water that my muscles held immediately increased a little bit. And as a result of that, the amount of just tension that they held at baseline also increased just a little bit. But it was enough such that I didn't have to consciously think about holding my joints in place. When I would do a workout, and I would cause some amount of damage to my muscles, such that they would get a stimulus to adapt and recover. The recovery was so much less burdensome on my system as a whole that it didn't significantly decrease my level of function in the days that followed. This was huge for me because previously, when I would do a workout, I'd basically be incapable of doing anything, even just getting around in daily life for days afterwards. Made school a real hassle.
Mm.
But after I started TRT, I'd be sore the next day, but that was it. I'd be like a little bit weaker, but not significantly so. I wouldn't be in significantly more pain. Um, and it really just made it so I could actually work out and still exist in day to day life. Um, this effect ended up kind of compounding on itself because normally, before I started hormones, I would work out. It would be incredibly burdensome on my system, and so I would be very weak, very dysfunctional in the following days. But the amount of stress that my body would incur just by going about daily life was also relative to my overall recovery capacity very high. And so while I was trying to recover from a workout, my body is also incurring new stressors just from daily life that it also had to try to recover from. And it just ended up being this compounding thing that it just couldn't keep up with. Whereas with TRT, I would do a workout. I would just start going through like a normal, healthy recovery process. And then the stressors of daily life in relation to my overall recovery capacity were so much smaller that it wouldn't really put any more burden on my system from just existing. And so that really significantly decreased my day-to-day pain levels. And on the topic of the chronic pain, the fibromyalgia, while I was in school for the latter half of my degree, I was studying for so many hours every day that my muscles were having to hold my whole like upper rear chain in the same position for hours on end. This resulted in extreme pain, to the point where I was going through doctor after doctor trying to find pain management solutions. None really came, and it got to the point where I almost dropped out of school a couple times because the pain was so intense. I could barely function. Um, and then when I started growth hormone, which I probably should have started before TRT, but at the time I didn't really know what I
Mhm.
was doing. It turned out both were very important. But when I started growth hormone, the amount of stress that studying for such long periods of time placed on my body, before it, I wasn't. I would actually have to have days between each bout of studying to effectively recover. But being in university, you don't have days to recover between bouts of studying, so the pain would just compound over time. Whereas with growth
Those
hormone,
those are words that have never been spoken.
I know, right? Terrible.
That's fucking studying.
Yeah.
You
It's like, no, you aren't meant for school then. No. But with growth hormone, it made it so that I could study for 6 hours straight, go to sleep, and wake up, and I would be ready to go again. As soon as I started that, my life fucking changed. Am I allowed to swear?
yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
cool.
you're good.
Yeah, my life fucking changed.
We're past the 10-minute mark.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it was really revolutionary. It made it so that, in fact, walking up until that point was a very large burden on my body. I could only sustainably walk about 2,000 steps a day, sometimes 3,000 if I was feeling really good. But just because I was putting repetitive stress on the same pieces of connective tissue, my body could only recover from a couple thousand steps a day. Once I started growth hormone, I was suddenly able to walk 5, 6, 7,000 steps and feel fine the next day. Which, that's still not a lot of steps, but for me, I was like, wow, I can be a normal person.
That's really sort of apparent here is, and this is why I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while. It's been on the works for ages,
Yeah,
but the thing that I find so fascinating, and it's kind of mind boggling that no one really thinks about like how these different conditions impact the body until you're faced with it,
yeah,
and then something as minuscule as taking your 10,000 steps a day is a
right.
burden.
Yeah,
Studying becomes a burden because
right.
you're not able to recover from these stressors that are still stressors on the body. Like you can't find something, you'll start coming
Yeah,
tight. You'll
yeah,
like steps. It's something that everyone walks every day,
right.
but if you can't recover sufficiently from that,
Yeah,
that leaves you in a kind of fucking shitty position.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
so, and this is why I've been looking forward to it, is that although I'm very against sort of any type of
Mhm,
hormonal replacement
mhm,
for enhancement purposes,
mhm.
in this situation, it's kind of like, well, it's kind of like protein. You're kind of having to supplement something to make sure you're at a baseline level. And
Yeah,
like this is where sort of my I kind of have to check my own ego and be like, okay, well, actually, this is actually beneficial for some people because
mhm.
they can't recover from things.
Right,
And it's like, how would I feel if, for example, after a brutal workout, I wasn't able to walk for the next week?
right.
I'd be raging. I'd be like, fuck,
Right.
why did I do that?
Yeah,
So for me, it's like how can I help like sort of spread this word that it is okay to do it in some particular cases, like you physically can't recover from any type of movement.
yeah. Um, and I think, yeah, that is such an important thing. Like you were saying, like it's like protein. I almost think of it like actual medication, right? If I'm traveling, I need to plan ahead and make sure I have my medication when I'm going, right? Similarly, I need to make sure that I'm bringing my growth hormone and whatever else I need. Especially if I'm traveling somewhere where I know I'm going to be very active, I need to make sure that my body is able to recover for that time. And so it's like everything else, right? There are just certain things, like, you got to drink water, you got to eat food. For me, I got to take my hormones if I want to be able to just be a normal person.
Mm.
And I did try coming off of hormones at some point, actually a couple points, when my body had gotten to the point where I was like, okay, I'm doing great, at least relative to how I've done for every other point in my life. I'm doing really good. Still not quite at like a normal person level, but I'm satisfied where I'm at. And so I had gotten a new doctor at the time, and he was like, "Oh, you're way too young to be on testosterone. Let's get you off and see if we can get your natural production to come up." So I did everything he said. We started HCG, which human chorionic gonadotropin, something like that. It stimulates your gonads to produce testosterone on its own, or some other hormones, which then cause
Mhm.
testosterone to be
What
generated.
word? Gonads.
Yeah, yeah. And so I tried that. I lasted about 3 weeks before my body started getting in such a sorry state that I was like, I literally cannot continue. I was getting to the point where I was just bedridden. I had to stop working out again. Um, I was just in extreme pain, more so than I had been in a year before that, when I had initially started it. And so I was like, okay, my body just can't do this.
Mhm.
Another time, that was for testosterone. I had tried a different time to come off of growth hormone, specifically this time because I had an endocrinologist who was amazing. He was trying to help me get a prescription for growth hormone covered by insurance. But in order to do that, you need a low IGF-1 blood test. So I was like, well, I'm on growth hormone right now. My IGF-1 level is gonna be high. So how long should I stop it, and when is my
Mhm.
growth hormone level gonna be the lowest so we can like rig the test? He told me about 2 to 3 weeks. So I came off of it for about 2 weeks, and then I got my blood checked at about 2.5 weeks. It didn't end up working out. My natural levels had started coming back very quickly after
Mhm.
that. That's one of the reasons why I say I should have started with growth hormone as opposed to testosterone, is because your natural levels of growth hormone come back much more quickly than does your natural testosterone production, if your natural testosterone production ever even does come back fully. But so I wasn't able to get the low IGF-1 test, but during those 2.5 weeks, my body felt old. I don't know really how else to say this. So one of the main benefits for me of growth hormone, besides the recovery thing, is it adds a pretty significant amount of water retention. For
Mhm.
most people, this might not be a benefit, but for me, it adds a significant amount of water retention in my joints, which actually has them
It
feel really
encapsulates
smooth.
everything.
Yes, exactly. And so for me, like in winter, when it would be colder, and granted, I'm in San Diego, so winters are like, yeah, it's whatever.
Bit easy. Bit
Yeah,
easy.
it's really easy. It doesn't snow here. Lowest it gets is like 50 Fahrenheit. Not sure what that is in Celsius, but it's not bad.
Mm.
But for me, that would have my joints like literally creaking when I would move my fingers. On growth hormone, that doesn't happen at all. And similarly, when I walk, when I'm doing anything that has high impact, like jogging, it really cushions my joints quite a bit. So when I came off of it for those 2 weeks, I just felt in my joints every movement I was doing. I tried lifting weights a couple times. Terrible idea, not on growth hormone. It felt like my joints were just grinding together.
Mm.
But I came back on it, and everything within a week felt like butter again. So it really has a significant impact when applied correctly.
Correctly.
Yeah.
Correctly. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. Obviously, a big part of hormonal replacement for enhancement purposes,
Mhm.
and I know you mentioned essentially the recovering
Mhm.
hormonal enhancement. But obviously, either way you look at it, there's these known side effects that are apparent. So like enlarged heart and all that stuff. What and we previously spoke about it, so that's why I kind of want to touch on it. Is you've spoke about how to effectively manage the different types of hormone replacement that you're doing and how to balance that out so there's minimum side effects. Is
Mhm.
that something that you're okay to talk about and how you would sort of explain to someone? We'll say
Yeah,
that.
yeah, absolutely. And I want to preface this by saying, so far I've just been talking about testosterone and growth hormone. There are many, many more drugs that can have benefits for recovery, and it is really purely dependent on the needs of the individual, what their personal risk tolerance is. That's a big thing. There are certain things that have no hormonal impacts whatsoever. And if somebody is only needs like a small amount more of recovery, then I would always rather go for the things that are have much higher safety margins, much less long term impacts, even if they have much smaller benefits. If that's the only if they only need that much benefit, then why not start with that instead of going balls to the walls and
Hmm.
having all of these longer term issues arise, right? So uh, I can speak very generally where let's talk about androgens first, right? Androgens at pure replacement levels, if we're just talking about testosterone, there really isn't anything that needs to be considered as around like enlarged heart or lipid issues like increased LDL, lower HDL, higher overall cholesterol, or hemoglobin hematocrit levels getting too out of hand. That is a common side effect with higher dosages and especially of certain androgens. When I say androgens, just for those who are unaware, I'm referring to anabolic steroids as a family, as well as testosterone, which is not technically an anabolic steroid. So when I say androgen, I just refer to that whole class of drug. But so all of those are common issues with high levels, high dosages of those things. But when you are going from hypogonadal, so lower levels than you should have in a healthy state, to just normal healthy levels, we actually generally only see improvements in all of those areas and many other areas of health. The heart tends to function significantly better. The liver does very well. Kidneys, blood values, all of those actually tend to improve pretty significantly when you go to true replacement levels. However, in many cases, myself included, in certain instances, you need more than replacement levels to get to where you're trying to go. Right. And so I was only talking about going to replacement levels before, but I have absolutely gone above that depending on what specific circumstances arise, you know, specifically post injury. If something happens and I just need an acute response, I need as much recovery as I can get. Of course, I'm going to be modulating everything I have access to get the recovery that I need to give myself the best outcomes.
How is
Uh,
it that you modulate these responses that you're chasing?
Yeah. So again, which drug I'm modulating, which drugs I'm including or excluding, is entirely dependent on which particular mechanisms I'm trying to target here. If I am wanting more water retention in my joints, that'll be a different thing that I change as opposed to if I need my muscles to have more quick, like a faster recovery time, right? Similarly, if I want my connective tissue to adapt or heal as quickly as possible, that's different than having muscles adapt and heal as quickly as possible. So, you know, depending on if it's an injury or a surgery that I'm trying to recover from, or if it's some specific functional goal that I have that I'm trying to work towards, it's all about figuring out what is the specific deficit that you are not able to fill with all of the other tools that you have at your disposal, and what drugs can come in to fill that deficit such that it gets rid of that limiter. Right. So always identifying what is the limiting factor here and how can that be addressed in the safest way possible. Right. Because if you can get away with something at a certain dose, why would you take more?
Mhm.
Right. And I think that alone to me is not controversial or weird at all, right? You just go with the lowest
You're just
dose necessary
supplementing.
to get where you're trying to go. But it seems like in really in bodybuilding, and I've seen a little bit in strongmen as well. They just kind of go with really high dosages, often because they think more will do more. And while it's true, like higher dosages will have more of the specific mechanism that they target happen. That specific mechanism might cease to be the limiting factor for you. So you might not actually get more progress with the thing you're working towards just because you're taking 5 times as much. So always seeking out what is the limiting factor here, what is the lowest dose and safest way I can address that limiting factor, and then when you bump into the next limiting factor, same process, iterative. And yeah, so with regards to how to, that's why one might push doses above just pure hormone replacement levels, as well as include other drugs that aren't necessarily replacements of endogenous hormone. As for how to mitigate side effects here, I can give I'll give examples with androgens and with growth hormone because these are very common drugs that are used and there are very well established ways of mitigating many of the side effects here. So I should preface this by saying when you're using drugs at higher doses than pure hormone replacement levels, or when you're using drugs that aren't actual replacement for endogenous hormones, they're going to have side effects. And you can take other things to lessen those side effects, but they're still going to have side effects in the long term, right? And for me, whatever those side effects may be, even if I was not able to take anything to mitigate them, would still end up being worth it because the impact they have on my life right now and for the rest of my life far outweighs however many years it takes off, right? And I entirely acknowledge and recognize that even though I'm trying to do things the healthiest way possible, even though I'm taking other things to really improve my health as much as possible, I'm still taking years off my life. But I am more than happy to do that because it allows me to live a life that
You're
is
comfortable
actually
with.
enjoyable and yeah, I'm able to be happy. And yeah, there's also something to be considered where how long would I be really living if I was bedridden constantly,
Yep.
right? Which is the case for many people who have my conditions. Um, Versus how long am I going to be able to live being extremely fit and active? Right? I have a very healthy heart. I'm very muscular. My blood markers are fantastic, right? And so, uh,
I mean, you
who's to
put your
say?
top on, so we don't know how muscular you are.
Yeah. The shirt hasn't come off yet. We'll save that for the end. So, yeah, keep watching. Yeah, so impossible to say like this is how much I'm gonna live now versus if I wasn't. But regardless, even if I only live to 40, I am much more happy to live like this
Hmm.
than to be bedridden until I'm 80. Much like by far, it's not even a contest. But with all that being said, there are some things you can do to improve health outcomes while taking these things. And so let's take androgens for as an example here. One of the most common, or rather most impactful side effects of exogenous androgen use, specifically at super physiological doses, so like full steroid cycles, is the left ventricular hypertrophy, so the heart enlargement that they cause, right? There are androgen receptors in the heart, just like every other muscle in the body, and it causes those muscles to hypertrophy, to get bigger. Which, a little bit of growth in response to, say, really taxing your heart through cardiovascular activity actually really improves the health of the heart. But as we see, even in normal cardiovascular people who really take that to an extreme cardiovascular activity, we see actually worse health outcomes with regards to the heart in, say, ultra marathon runners than we do in people who are just relatively cardiovascularly fit. This is because it causes the heart to grow to a point that its ejection fraction, I'll just be very, very general. It makes the heart less efficient at pumping, and thus it puts more strain on the heart for any given pump that it does. And therefore, it really increases the likelihood of failure and heart attacks, and even stroke and blood clots in some cases. So, heart failure is really the thing that has caused so many bodybuilders in the past handful of years to just drop dead. And it's because they're taking very high doses and their heart is growing far beyond what it ever should. And so there, just as an example, there's a drug called telmisartan that is an angiotensin 2 receptor blocker. Angiotensin 2 is a receptor in the heart that can regulate the growth of the heart in response to resistance training or, well, really just any stimulus to the cardiovascular muscles, or sorry, to the muscles of the heart, cardiac muscles. And by blocking the angiotensin 2 receptor, you actually can really mitigate a very large amount of the cardiovascular or the cardiac muscle hypertrophy that you would get as a result of androgen usage. And so that very directly can really improve heart health outcomes. And we actually see this in relatively short time frames where you take people who are blasting steroids without using this drug, and you have them get scans of their heart done before and after a very large steroid cycle. You will see notable differences in terms of the size of various ventricles, just the amount of heart growth that has occurred. If you take similar bodies, similar people, or even the same people through similar steroid cycles, but with telmisartan in the mix, of course, in a dose-dependent manner, you will see decreases, or you will see significantly less effect on the heart. And so long term, that can be a very effective way of mitigating the detriments to the heart from higher doses.
Like, it was important for me to talk about the balances because obviously if there's a way for people to get better, you kind of want that to be as less damaging as possible. It's kind of like either dying by the sword or living by the sword. It's one of those that, although you're better to have something there, but also be aware of the side effects and how you can mitigate most of them. Obviously you can't mitigate all of them, but at
Right.
least having some protection to at least give you some life at the end of it as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
How do you go about coaching people through their conditions, and how is it that you're able to exactly dose the exercise compared to what they can actually handle as well?
Yeah. So that's an awesome question. So the first thing to talk about is really that it is first important to make a training plan or a series of exercises that is suitable for the individual. Right. If somebody can't comfortably put their arms above their head, then you shouldn't be giving them like lying dumbbell pullovers where they're going to be weighted with their arms over their head. Because that's just both hazardous and just kind of addictive. Yeah. Right. So making sure that you're giving somebody exercises that, at least on the face of it, after doing like some basic intake. Actually, I do a very thorough intake with my clients. We'll have a long phone call and then have them fill out a large number of questions. But yeah. And so I'll start off by making a training plan that, at least on the face of it, seems like it would be doable for the individual, right? But even with that, right, I can't totally imagine every possible outcome. I don't have necessarily the exact idea of everything they're capable or not capable of. And so what I do is in my own training and the Excel sheets that I'm developing to sell, I have people track things like how much pump or muscle disruption do you get as a result of doing this exercise at the prescribed sets, reps, and weight.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. So we'll go over each. Muscle disruption refers to the amount of perceived weakness or uh, perturbation. So like how weird the muscle feels, so to speak,
Mhm.
after performing a given number of sets of an exercise. Right. So for example, I have very low volume requirements, very weirdly low volume requirements. So I'll do one hard set of stiff-legged deadlifts, and I won't be able to like do a standing hamstring curl. Like I won't be able to pick my heels up towards my butt at
Oh,
all. My hamstrings just stop working, and they won't start working for like maybe 30 minutes afterwards. So that is an extreme amount of muscle disruption, right? Similarly, with the pump, right? Pump refers to very directly just the amount of increased blood flow that you get in the given target muscle, right? And the rating that I have my clients do and that people will do in the Excel sheets that I'm making is it's on a scale where they rate the pump and muscle disruption for the target muscle of the exercise, right?
Mm.
So let's take stuff like a deadlift as an example. If we're targeting the hamstrings, I'm not wondering how much muscle disruption you got in your lower back. That is relevant for us to know whether or not this is a good exercise for you. But that's not what I'm referring to when I'm determining how much more or less volume you need. Um, so for the pump, it's how much more blood flow you get in the target muscle. Where, as an extreme example, a couple weeks ago, right before a deload, I did a drop set of some stand away cable curls for biceps. And after my first drop set, so including like 3 drops in weight, I went to pick up my phone to put in the numbers I got, and I literally couldn't pick the phone up. My biceps just wouldn't curl, and it wasn't because like I had a significant amount of muscle disruption. It was because my biceps were so pumped that I literally just couldn't flex my elbow. And so they're two somewhat different components or results of exercising, but they end up meaning a very similar thing in terms of a proxy for how well you stimulated a given muscle. You'll generally get more of a pump from higher rep work, whereas you'll get generally more muscle disruption from lower rep work, right? Like you're not going to get a crazy pump from doing like a 5 rep max on deadlift, but you're going to get a ton of muscle disruption. Similarly, you might not feel a ton of muscle disruption for like a set of 15 to 20 lateral raises, but you're going to have a gnarly pump, right? So I have people rate them in the same vein. They're not 2 separate ratings, it's the same one. And then we also look at how much pain you experienced while you're doing a given exercise, and how recovered you are in the target muscles from the last workout where you hit that given muscle group, right? So from a recovery vein, that lets me know how much more or less volume you can tolerate for the exercises for a given muscle group. Because let's say you hit hamstrings Monday and Thursday. If on Thursday you are still so sore that the muscle just like doesn't perform properly, then we know you need less volume on Monday for your hamstrings. Similarly, if you get to Thursday and you like stopped being sore 2 days ago, we know you can probably handle at least a little bit more volume or intensity for your hamstrings on Monday. And so recovery is a very important aspect of this that we track. Generally using soreness as a proxy for recovery, but in many individuals, we also have to look at whether or not they are progressing. Because many people, generally, this is more prevalent for people who are slower twitch muscle type. They tend to not get very sore. And you can throw crazy amounts of volume at people who are very slow twitch, and they might get a little bit sore, but then 24 hours later they'll be good. And so for people who are generally slower twitch, or in cases where we are working mainly with connective tissue and joint recovery rather than muscular recovery capabilities, then we'll use your ability to progress and whether or not your pain is getting better or worse over time as proxies for your ability to recover. And that's the note on pain as well, is if your pain level for a given exercise in a given workout is, let's say, a minor amount of pain, I consider that okay. When you're lifting hard, your joints are going to creak a little bit. Like things aren't going to feel fucking perfect all the time. So a small amount of discomfort or like a little bit of like dull achiness, I consider that okay, as long as it does not get worse from workout to workout, and ideally it does not get worse as you progress set to set, right? Because if you feel like a little uncomfortable on set one, and then on set two, it's like the same amount of discomfort. On set three, same amount of discomfort. That's totally okay. That means you're not like actively causing damage. But if set after set, it's getting more and more uncomfortable and more painful, that's a good sign that you should probably stop or change what you're doing in some way. And similarly, if let's say you're only at a minor amount of discomfort one week and it doesn't get worse across sets, but then the next week you come back and you're at like a moderate amount of pain or discomfort, then next week you come back and you're at a significant amount of pain or discomfort, well, we know you're causing damage or you're doing something that you're unable to recover from effectively. And so something needs to change, be it volume, be it your form or technique of how you're exercising or how you're executing the exercise, or we might need a different exercise for you. And so, how I go about all of this is, especially with injury recovery people or people who have chronic health conditions, I start people at very, very low volumes and extremely low intensity. Um, and then, what I prefer doing is first increasing volumes while staying at relatively low intensity, because I find that just getting people to be more active generally, even if they're not going super hard, being more active is just across the board a beneficial thing. Even if you're literally just moving and it's not hard at all, I'd rather people be able to do that 4 days a week, really light intensity, as opposed to one day a week going moderately hard. You know, and so first I scale up volume and frequency to moderate amounts. I'm not going to have somebody go balls to the walls in terms of volume or frequency. But then once we're in a very reasonable place for volume and frequency, then we very slowly start increasing intensity. If somebody has a history of either being unable to gauge how hard they can push and effectively recover, or if their body is just very finicky and some days they can push a certain to a certain degree and be fine, and other days they can push to a certain degree and just get super fucked up from it. In both those cases, I will tend to be take a much more conservative approach where we only add one rep per set week to
Mm,
week. And then, once they get to the upper end of a rep range, we'll increase the weight a tiny amount, drop the reps accordingly, and then continue that just one rep at a time, week to week. This is a very slow way of doing things, but it prevents the person from taking disadvantageous liberties where, it took me almost a decade to figure out how hard I could actually push with and still be able to recover from, because my muscles are way stronger than what my joints and connective tissue
mhm.
are able to recover from, even now with everything I've done. And so, in people who are in a similar situation as I used to be, I don't want to go through a process that takes 10 years with them. So instead, we just go very slowly. And, in 6 months, we'll end up at a place where they are going relatively hard at that point. But I'd rather go 6 months to get to that point rather than go way too fast in 2 weeks and then suddenly they get injured and have to fall back down to baseline again.
And I think that's an important way to look at the load management systems for different chronic situations that can be occurring. Is that okay? Maybe we can't increase by the normal 5% each week or 2.5% each week, but
Right.
let's add a rep here. Let's maybe add a 1.75 somewhere along these lines and effectively progress them in a way that is still manageable for their body to keep up.
Exactly.
I think that's a really good strategy, and thank you for taking this through your processes in that load management strategy. Is
Absolutely.
that something that you have to deal with yourself in the terms of you? There's certain areas of your body that are more prone to these effects, so you kind of have to take it slower.
Absolutely. So there's two areas in recent times that I have finally decided to address. I don't know why it took me so long. One is the lower back, and the other is my ankles. So I'll start with the lower back one because I already briefly introduced the lower back injury that I had in high school. So I I went to physical therapy for it. Of course, it just made it worse, so I stopped going to physical therapy for it. Then decided to take the approach where I would just avoid doing exercise that hurt it, and that it worked okay. I was able to start working out for a while, and I was able to make gains everywhere else. I just focused on exercises that put little to no strain on my lower back. But like I would still end up getting a pretty serious re-injury on at least a yearly basis. Like at least once a year, I would re-injure my back so badly that I couldn't walk for a week. Um, and then I'd have to very slowly rehab myself just back to like being able to walk around in daily life again, and then I would be able to start working out, but have to really take it slow. And even just like being able to pick up a plate and move it onto the bar and off, that took every time I re-injure my back, I have to be very careful with stuff like that, and sometimes just have to transition purely to like machine work, so I don't have to be lifting up anything. It took me up until, and I'm not proud to say this, but up until October, so about 7 months ago, to finally decide that I am tired of putting up with it.
Mm.
Um, and this happened. So I competed in August in a bodybuilding competition, and about a month afterwards, I was back to like a healthy body weight, body fat level. About a month afterwards, I seriously injured my back and couldn't walk for almost 2 weeks. It took another month or so to just be able to get back into the gym. Of course, not doing anything on my back, and then uh, I it was like, do you know tibialis anterior
Yep.
raises? Yeah, I
Yep.
had a tib bar. I put it onto my ankles. I went to scoot back on the chair with my feet in the thing, and just that slight twisting pops my spine out of place. And I should say, these back re-injuries are slight dislocations of my spine that result in significant impingement of nerves and muscle spasms all around, that I then have to do a whole bunch of things to get the muscle to stop spasming, and then I can pop it back into place. But then there's just leftover pain, inflammation, spasms for generally about a week or two afterwards. So that that re-injury happened about a month after the last one, and it was with something so small that I was just so pissed off, because every time before that, I had re-injured myself doing something stupid, like progressing weight and walking lunges too quickly, or just being a jackass and just like starting to do barbell back squats for the first time in a while and just starting to load more and more plates on because it felt good. Yeah, all of the other times I was doing something stupid that I knew I shouldn't have been
Mhm.
doing, but that time it was something so benign that I was like, okay, this wasn't stupid. I am just really, really weak in my lower back. And so I had a little existential crisis, and I was like, I have spent the last decade of my life figuring out how to rehab every injury I've ever had. And I've been able to help all of my clients rehab all of their injuries. Why the hell am I not doing this for the most significant injury that I have, the most impactful one that I have? And so I started really just focusing on rehabbing my spine at that point. And for the first time since I injured my back since in high school, I think this was 2 weeks ago, I was able to deadlift, I think it was, what is it, 315, 375.
170 exactly.
Cool, nice. Yeah, so I was so stoked about that because my lifetime PR in high school was 405 pounds, so just a little bit above that. And so I was able to do 375 for like 8 reps, and which is like objectively much stronger than I have ever been. And I've just continued working out like that. I've since once I did that, it didn't feel great on my back because I had just been progressing by about 20 pounds every single week. Um, but so I've taken a step back. I'm just staying at 315, which I think is maybe 140 kilos. Um, and I'm just focusing on getting to high reps now. So once I can do 315 for like multiple sets of at least 20 reps, then I'm going to start progressing the weight again, just because connective tissue adaptations take significantly more time than muscular adaptations
Yeah,
take.
there's
So
less blood that flows through it.
exactly. So I want to give my connective tissue time at this weight now that I can handle it to really just feel really smooth in it. And then once this weight feels just like totally good, super smooth, then I'm gonna start pushing again. But something that I ran into at the beginning of this journey was I kept trying to up the weight too quickly, just because I would, I'd start off really light, like I'd do a handful of deadlifts with just the bar one week. I'd come back to it next week and be like, okay, let's just add 25s onto each side of the bar. Then I'll be doing, what is that, like 40 kilos. And it felt great. So I'll add on another like 10 kilos or another like 20 kilos. And then, but adding 20 kilos a week, not very sustainable. And so very quickly I'd run into strains. I got re-injured once. And so I was like, okay, I would never tell any of my clients to do this. I'm literally just being a jackass. And so I
Yeah.
gave myself a rule that I cannot add more than about 9 kilos per week
Hmm.
to any lift, no matter what, which is still a pretty fair amount to be fair. And then in addition to that, I could not up my weight unless I was at least 12 reps for every set for that exercise. Um, and so with those two rules, I've been able to consistently progress and give my body enough time to really adapt to these new weights. And so that was really important in limiting myself, because me, like all of my clients, I'm like, well, I can do this, so I should do this. That's not the case. Just because you can do something doesn't mean it is healthy or productive to do something. And then the other cases with my ankles, and this is a slightly different method of progression than we've talked about so far here. My ankles, I originally got such severe tendonitis in actually a handful of tendons through my ankles that I became officially handicapped because of it. I couldn't walk more than about 500 steps a day for a few months.
Wow.
Yeah, the reason this happened, hilariously, was because I already had weak ankles, and so I wanted to train them to become stronger. And so I started doing calf raises, and I should have learned from the years of physical therapy where I saw that my full range of motion is not necessarily a healthy range of motion. And looking back at old videos of me doing calf raises, it hurts to watch because you can see my ankles just literally come out of their sockets at the bottom and go back in as I come up. So I was going until the bones of my tibia and the bones of my foot were literally just smashed together, and there was no more range that my foot could possibly go through. And then coming back up and totally uncontrolled, just like smashing down into it and coming back out. Yeah, and so it resulted in severe tendonitis, tendinopathy throughout multiple tendons. Specifically, most severely, the Achilles tendon and the posterior tibialis. Um, uh, Muscle and tendon. And it took, even with all of the drugs I could think to use, it took about 6 months, and actually maybe close to 8 months, until I could just walk around for like 1 or 2 thousand steps a day again. That was a terrible period because I don't know. I'm guessing you and probably most athletes, probably most people listening to this, uh, derive quite a bit of mental health benefits from exercise and just general movement. And not being able to do that is it sucks. Yeah. And so this happened years ago. I think back in 2022. Um, and I had initially tried rehabbing it by getting back into doing things like really light at first, but still I wasn't controlling my range of motion, and I would just make it worse. Like I would do one set of calf raises body weight, and I would be like right back to square one, barely able to stand up for more than a couple minutes. And so my ankles finally, after like really just not touching them for a while and figuring out some specific peptides that really helped reduce levels of inflammation and just kind of get out of that chronic positive inflammatory cycle, my ankles got to the point where like they were just generally okay day to day, and I was back able to walk like 4 to 5 thousand steps a day without issue. Um, and so from there, I figured, okay, same thing with the back, and this actually I decided to do this around the same time I decided to do really focus on rehabbing my lower back. Um, I knew exactly theoretically, like in my head, I knew what I had to do. I just had never actually applied it to
Mhm.
myself or treated myself like a client. So I started off by doing calf raises from the floor, assisted. So using my hands to assist, generally with a band or something. But if someone's wanting to replicate this, I would probably encourage them to use like a lat pull down machine, so you can actually see exactly how much resistance or how much assistance you're offering yourself, and slowly decrease that assistance over time. But I was hold on and assist myself, and I would do calf raises from the floor, so no deficit whatsoever. This effectively prevented me from going into excessive ranges of motion.
Hypermobility.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it allowed me to do enough reps to really get blood flowing to the area, encourage synovial fluid flow to the connective tissue, um, and really just get the thing moving again at low enough loads and at a small enough range of motion that it didn't cause me issues. Still, I had to stay with very low volumes, no more than 1 or 2 sets per week per movement pattern. But given that I'm doing all the things with lifestyle and I'm on sufficient drugs to make that sufficient for me to actually grow and adapt over time, it was enough to get stronger. And so I did that with ankle dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, as well as inversion and eversion. Yeah, those actually weighted inversion and eversion, just with like a foot strap that holds a dumbbell to the bottom of your foot. That ended up being one of the most impactful things for rehabbing my ankles, because it directly targeted the tendons that were in the weakest states. That and then the calf raises. So over time, once I was able to do up to 30 reps per set with the assisted, just flat ground calf raises, I removed the assistance. Once I could do 30 reps per set with no assistance, then I slowly started increasing the range of motion by adding a plate that I would stand on. So by doing it on a plate rather than just like in air, that allowed me to freely determine how deep I go. By doing it on a plate, the ground was still there. So I would still be hitting the ground at the bottom. So it still controlled my range of motion and prevented me from going into excessive ranges. And still today, my ankles are good enough where I can do all of the hikes that I want to with big 40-pound packs on my back. I can do all of the things I could ever want to do with my ankles. I don't have any ankle issues anymore. And I'm pissed that it only took like 6 months to fix, because I've been dealing with it for
Yeah.
years. So, um, but
Speaking of blood flow restriction to these connective tissues,
yeah,
what are your thoughts on voodoo flossing, and have you tried that? And does it work for specific conditions?
on what flossing?
Voodoo flossing.
Voodoo flossing. Could you just describe what that is? I don't think I've heard of it.
It's essentially you're wrapping a tight band around a specific joint, muscle, or sort of these tendons.
Mhm.
You're contracting, making the blood flow really obviously be trapped in there. So you're kind of causing that blood flow restriction, and then you quickly take off the strap, and the blood flows and rushes through that system.
So I can talk from a disclaimer. I haven't seen any literature on this, so I can't speak as to what the actual effects would be as the literature talks about it. But I can talk about my personal thoughts with what I've experienced, the other literature that I've seen around blood flow restriction and like fluid nutrient delivery, waste product clearance to connective tissue. Um,
If you
my
want, I can show you a quick video. The blood apparently just rushes through, and it creates that blood rush, so it goes through all the tendons, all the ligaments, soft tissue, and it's supposed to help heal it.
So purely based on what I just saw and what I know. Again, I haven't looked at the specific literature on this specific technique, but I can speak generally and just do like think critically about it.
Hmm.
Based on the movements that she was doing, those specific movements, and especially like the amount and intensity that she did them at, wouldn't encourage any real significant amount of blood flow. What would encourage a significant amount of blood flow is the fact that you're restricting blood flow so heavily, and then removing it would cause, yeah, a ton of blood to rush back in. But I am skeptical to think that the very limited amount of movement she did there would actually influence that process significantly.
Yeah, I should have watched that video beforehand. But there was a case that when I saw this, I was about 18, 17,
Mhm.
18. I'm 28 now. So it was a while back, but the guy was actually doing full shoulder presses, pull ups, like big
Mhm.
ranges of motions that
Uh,
created sufficient blood restriction to the area.
Yeah, I think that would be more effective if we're talking about just a maximum amount of influx of blood flow all at once. I think something worth considering here, though, is that blood is not the thing that's delivering nutrients or removing waste products from connective tissue. It's synovial fluid. Um, and that I'm not sure how that would react to having but essentially blood flow restriction. I'm not sure if that carries over into synovial
Mhm.
fluid restriction as well. But I can talk on what I do know improves that significantly. Um, we know that there are a couple different types of connective tissue adaptations, two main types really. One is in the actual tensile strength, which is usually correlative to cross sectional area of the connective tissue. But we're seeing some newer literature that connective tissue tensile strength might not actually be as a result of the cross sectional area, but too preliminary to actually make any calls on that. So let's just call it tensile strength adaptations. And then there is another type of adaptation, which is really the piece of connective tissue's ability to have nutrients delivered to it and to remove waste products through improved synovial fluid circulation. And we know that higher loads are what creates tensile strength adaptations, whereas higher rep stuff, I can't really say endurance work because there is some minimum requirement of forces necessary to create these adaptations. But relatively higher rep work generally really is effective at improving nutrient delivery and waste product removal to these injured areas. So, a common modification that I will give between, excuse me, like bodybuilders as opposed to injury recovery people, because at the end of the day, the way that I go about programming set additions and like volume adjustments for bodybuilders versus injury recovery clients is quite similar. But the a big difference is that for bodybuilders, we're adjusting rep ranges based on what gives the individual the greatest stimulus response. Whereas for people with injuries, we're finding out which rep range gives somebody the least amount of fatigue or stress to their connective tissue. This almost always comes with higher rep work because we know that anything between 5 and 30 reps per working set is equally effective when it comes to muscular hypertrophy, as long as it's taken to an equivalent relative intensity, so an equivalent distance from absolute concentric muscular failure. Um, but so you have anywhere between 5 and 30 reps to work and to grow. So beyond that, the question is, what secondary outcomes are you looking for besides just muscle growth? Are we looking to maximize strength? In that case, of course, we want to go with lower reps because that allows you to lift higher loads and work on more strength. Are we trying to improve the health of the connective tissue while minimizing loads? If we're really trying to minimize loads, then we can go as close to 30 reps per set as we can, and we'll still be getting a similar stimulus for muscle growth. But the weight that you can lift for 30 reps is way less than the weight that you can lift for 5 reps, right? And so, especially for the earlier stages of injury recovery clients, I very often opt for higher rep work because the very first stage is like, of course, getting all the basics covered around stress management, sleep, diet, like all of the basics covered just to make sure that they can recover effectively. But then the first step in training is to improve the health and ability to recover of the connective tissue itself. And so that really comes by improving its ability to have nutrients delivered and to clear out waste products. And
Mm.
that higher rep work and the, just closer to 30 reps is very beneficial for improving that ability over time. And then over time, once they are very functional and capable in those rep ranges, then we slowly start dropping the rep ranges. And at that point, we really start looking at, okay, what is the actual outcome or like goal that the person has in mind? Are they trying to become a physique athlete? Or athlete is a rough term that I apply to bodybuilders, yeah, whatever. But are they trying to become the best rock climber possible? Whatever it is, we start really gearing exercises and rep ranges and all of that towards whatever last outcome they want. But at first, it always starts with relatively high rep work so we can improve the delivery of nutrients.
What's your PR song? I've been asking
PR.
I've been asking everyone that comes on. I
Oh
like
god.
the different takes I've been getting.
Let me. I have an actual a whole playlist. When I'm going really fucking hard in the gym. I don't know about you. I'm one of those guys that just like every time I get bored of my music, I just make another playlist. So I
Mhm.
have like 3+ hundred playlists on my Spotify right now. But of this current playlist that I'm using, let's see, anything by Corpse is really what I'm going for. It's just like I don't even necessarily like the music. It's just like angry
It
and
gets
just like
fucked up.
hates everything. Yeah, and so I'm like, okay, yeah, this makes me upset. I'm ready to go.
Yeah, fair. Last question. What is the hill that you will die on in this industry?
Oh God. Um, that any diet that fully excludes a given food group or food item is complete horseshit, and people should just eat generally whole, unprocessed foods and enjoy life rather than demonizing things. That
Mm,
actually applies to training as well. Just don't demonize things. Just find what works for you and enjoy.
so not a big fan of vegans. Is that what we're saying?
I If
Joking,
people
I'm
want to
joking,
be vegan for moral reasons, that's whatever. But if they're doing it for health reasons, they can get the fuck out of here.
fair, fair.
Yeah,
No, I appreciate you so much for coming on today.
absolutely.
The top stayed on, so I think it's a successful mission.
Successful mission. I mean,
Oh,
yeah. Thank you
uh,
so much for having me on, Manny.
no, it's all good. It's been a long time coming, and it's a conversation that I've been really interested in because a lot of my morals are against anti-doping and performance enhancing.
Mhm.
But like when our first initial conversation, I kind of switched that into
Mhm.
including people who can recover, and I think that's again, it's good to speak with people like you who have a different take on like different conditions and how bodies can break down, and then how can you supplement that into making them function. And I think it's again, Sachin was the one that said this, but he's very big on you can agree with someone 95% of the time
Mhm.
if you speak about the 5%, and if you're able to come to a certain resolution on,
Yeah.
okay, let's be in the middle, this is my opinion, this
Right.
is your opinion, but we can still talk about it openly
Right.
and come to a conclusion where maybe you're right about this, which you are 100%, like people need to recover. Hey, I'm not scared to admit that I might be wrong in that aspect. For
Yeah.
athletes, I will fight tooth and nail where
Yeah.
doping is fucking not, it's not on. But for people who can't recover, of fucking
Yeah.
course, you need to function afterwards.
Right. No, of course. Yeah, I think it's so beneficial to, especially for topics which are generally taboo, and especially since PEDs are becoming in this weird area where they're almost fetishized on social media now. I think it's really important to have open and honest communication and conversations around like when it actually makes sense to use them versus when it's just some gym bro who wants to like fucking go hard, bro. Yeah,
100%. And I
yeah,
think that's why I was looking forward to this conversation. Is we're not just talking about let's fucking go ham, let's lift as
right.
much, let's look as best as we can.
Hmm.
We're talking about, okay, we are talking about bodybuilding and how that can help, but it's also a functioning thing for people to function. Like
Right.
go to
Yeah.
the gym, have a solid workout,
Hmm.
go home, and then be able to function the next day. Take 1,000 steps, sleep
Yeah,
properly.
right. Yeah, so important. And unfortunately, yeah, I've had clients who some of them weren't able to recover on their own, and we tried a number of drugs, and uh, they just didn't respond well to some of them, and not in terms of like any long term side effects, but in terms of they just didn't get the
Recovery goals.
benefits, and so it's there's such a big genetic component of what you respond well to and what you don't that I think it's really important, outside of the injury recovery field, and just if you're like a bodybuilder, even if you are just like wanting to get big, uh, I'm going to encourage people not to do that. But even if you don't want to listen, if you do want to do it anyway, like really consider the fact that you might not respond well to things. And even if you do a ton of steroids, like you might just end up looking like an average guy who lifts. And that's the sad, unfortunate truth of it all is you're not going to look like Mr. Olympia. You might, but probably almost certainly won't. So worth really taking a while to consider things.
100%. And again, I think it's these conversations that kind of open the eyes to the wider community on like there is some benefit if used properly.
Mhm.
And we're not talking about sports, we're talking about people's health. If you want to plug anything that you've got coming up, I know you do quite a lot of webinars and workshops. If you've got anything coming up, let us know where we can find you as well.
Awesome. Yeah. No big events planned currently, but if you liked what you heard, please give me a follow on Instagram at the Joint Coach. That's it. Yeah, I post here relatively often, trying to get more frequent, but at least a few times a week. And if you ever have any questions or anything, I am very happy to answer any questions you might have in the DMs. And yeah, looking forward to hearing from you guys.
100%. For those who are wondering where all the topless jokes come from, it's his Instagram page.
Yeah, there used to be a lot more shirtless pictures and videos of me, and then it just started to attract the not the followers that I was trying to attract.
Yeah,
not
and these are purely jokes. We actually know each other outside of this, so we are joking with each other. No hate to Aaron, please.
no, I it's all in good fun. I hope nobody thinks that we're fucking throwing
Good making
shade
jokes.
subtly back and forth.
So I appreciate you so much for coming on, Aaron. It was a pleasure
Absolutely.
talking to you.
Likewise. Thank you so much.
Peace.